My name is Aban. I'm 34 years old, and on December 1st, 2018, something happened that shattered everything I believed about God. I went to pray to Allah behind a Christian church, but instead, I encountered Jesus Christ Himself. What I'm about to tell you is my true testimony. I came to America in 2017 with nothing but a suitcase, an engineering degree, and 5 prayers a day that had sustained me my entire life. The small town in Virginia, where my company relocated me, felt like another planet. Back home in Pakistan, the call to prayer echoed through the streets 5 times daily, reminding every soul of their duty to Allah. Here, church bells rang on Sundays, while the rest of the week passed in spiritual silence. The first few months were the hardest. I would wake before dawn for Fajr prayer, spreading my prayer mat toward Mecca in my tiny apartment, whispering the familiar Arabic verses that had comforted me since childhood. But something felt different. The words that once filled my heart with peace now felt hollow, like echoes in an empty room. I told myself it was just the adjustment to a new country, new job, new life. I was wrong. My work schedule became my master. 12-hour days at the engineering firm meant missing Duhur prayer during lunch, rushing through Asr prayer in a bathroom stall, and collapsing into bed too exhausted for proper Isha prayer. The Islamic Center was 40 minutes away, and I found myself making excuses not to attend Friday prayers. Have you ever felt like you were drowning spiritually and didn't even realize you were underwater? That was my reality. The guilt ate at me like acid. Every missed prayer felt like a betrayal of everything my father had taught me, everything I claimed to believe. I would lie awake at night promising Allah I would do better tomorrow, be more devoted tomorrow, find time tomorrow. But tomorrow always brought the same crushing schedule, the same spiritual emptiness, the same growing distance from the God I thought I knew. My coworkers were kind but completely oblivious to my internal struggle. They would invite me to lunch or happy hour, not understanding that I needed those precious minutes to connect with my Creator. I began eating alone at my desk, trying to pray quietly in my office. But even that felt inadequate. The constant interruptions, the lack of proper ablution facilities, the inability to prostrate properly on the carpet, everything about practicing Islam in America felt like swimming upstream. I started questioning things I had never questioned before. Why did Allah feel so distant here? Why were my prayers feeling more like empty recitation than conversations with the Almighty? Why did I feel more spiritually lost in this land of religious freedom than I ever had back home? These thoughts terrified me because questioning Allah's presence felt like the beginning of losing faith altogether. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in November. I had missed 3 prayers that day due to back to back meetings. Sitting in my car after work, I felt completely hollow inside. I tried to pray Maghrib in the parking lot, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time in my life, I couldn't remember the opening verses of Surah Al Fatiha. The panic that gripped me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. That night, I called my father back in Karachi. I tried to explain my spiritual struggles without admitting how far I had fallen. His voice was stern but loving as he reminded me that Allah tests his faithful servants, that difficulty in prayer was a sign I needed to try harder, be more disciplined, more devoted. He was right, of course, but his words only deepened my shame. I made a decision that would change everything. I would find a way to pray properly during the day, no matter what it took. I would drive during my lunch break until I found a quiet, clean place where I could spread my prayer mat, face Mecca, and reconnect with Allah the way my forefathers had for over 1,000 years. I was desperate for that connection, starving for it in a way that physical hunger could never compare to. Ask yourself this question: when was the last time you felt truly desperate for God? Not just wanting His blessing or help, but desperately needing His presence like oxygen? That desperation drove me to search every day during lunch for the perfect place to pray. I tried parks, but they were too public. I tried empty parking lots, but they felt disrespectful. I needed somewhere peaceful, somewhere clean, somewhere I could pour out my heart to Allah without interruption or embarrassment. I was drowning spiritually, and I didn't even know it. What I thought was a crisis of discipline was actually something much deeper. My soul was crying out for something real, something authentic, something more than the ritual I had been going through. I just didn't understand that Allah was about to answer that cry in the most unexpected way possible. The irony wasn't lost on me later. Here I was, a Muslim man in Christian America, more desperate for God than I had ever been in my life. I thought the solution was finding the perfect place to practice my Islamic prayers. I had no idea that Allah was leading me to an encounter that would shatter every assumption I had about who God really is and how He reveals Himself to seeking hearts. Looking back now, I can see that every missed prayer, every moment of spiritual emptiness, every night of questioning was preparing my heart for what was coming. God was clearing away my religious routine to make room for a relationship I never knew was possible. The drive that Thursday started like all the others. I had exactly 45 minutes for lunch, and I was determined to find the perfect place to reconnect with Allah. I had been searching for weeks, driving through residential neighborhoods, past schools and parks, looking for somewhere quiet and clean where I could spread my prayer mat without drawing attention or causing offense. I turned down a tree lined street I had never explored before, and that's when I saw it. A small white church sat back from the road, surrounded by oak trees that were just beginning to show their autumn colors. The building was a simple but beautiful, with a modest steeple and large windows that caught the afternoon sunlight. What struck me most was how peaceful the grounds looked, how perfectly quiet and undisturbed. My first instinct was to keep driving. This was a Christian church, after all, and I was a Muslim looking for a place to pray to Allah. But something made me slow down and really look at the property. The grass was well maintained, the ground were clean, and most importantly, there was no one around. A small parking lot wrapped around the back of the building, and beyond that, I could see a lawn area shielded by trees. I pulled into the parking lot and sat in my car for several minutes, wrestling with the decision. Every rational part of my mind said this was inappropriate, that I should find somewhere else. But another part of me, the part that was desperate for connection with Allah, reminded me of what I had learned growing up. Allah is present everywhere. The Quran teaches that the whole earth is a mosque for the believer. If I could pray in a clean place, While facing Mecca, location shouldn't matter. Ask yourself this question: have you ever been so hungry for a God that you were willing to step outside your comfort zone, even into places that felt forbidden? That's exactly where I found myself. My spiritual desperation was stronger than my cultural hesitation. I drove around the building to make sure no one was there. The back parking lot was empty, and the lawn behind the church was completely private, hidden from the street by mature trees. It was perfect, quiet, clean, and secluded. I could pray here without disturbing anyone or drawing unwanted attention. Still, I hesitated. What would my father say if he knew I was praying behind a Christian church? What would the Imam back home think? But then I remembered how empty my prayers had felt lately, how distant Allah seemed, how desperately I needed this connection. I made the decision to trust that Allah would understand my sincere intentions. I parked my car and retrieved my prayer mat from the trunk. It was a beautiful rug my mother had given me when I left Pakistan, woven with intricate patterns in deep blues and golds. As I unfolded it on the grass behind the church, I felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if something significant was about to happen. The afternoon was unseasonably warm for December, with barely a breeze stirring the leaves above me. I used the water fountain near the church's back entrance to perform my ablution, the ritual washing that precedes Islamic prayer. The cool water felt refreshing on my hands, face, and feet. I had done this thousands of times before, but today each movement felt more intentional, more meaningful. Returning to my prayer mat, I used my phone's compass to determine the direction of Mecca. I positioned myself carefully, making sure I was facing exactly the right direction for prayer. The familiar routine should have been comforting, but instead I felt an unusual awareness of my surroundings, as if the very air around me was charged with expectancy. As I stood on my prayer mat, ready to begin the Duhr prayer, I noticed how incredibly quiet everything was. No traffic noise, no voices, no distractions of any kind. Just perfect, profound silence. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. The peace was unlike anything I had experienced in months of searching for the right place to pray. Looking back now, I should have recognized that this wasn't ordinary quiet. There was something supernatural about the atmosphere around that church, something that made the space feel sacred in a way I couldn't explain. The very ground seemed to pulse with an unseen presence. I raised my hands to begin the prayer, speaking the familiar Arabic words that open every Islamic prayer session. Allahu Akbar. God is greatest. But as the words left my mouth, I felt something I had never experienced before. It was as if the words were being heard by someone who was physically present with me, someone who was listening with an intensity that made my heart race. The sensation was so strong that I actually looked around to see if someone had approached without my noticing. But the church grounds were still completely empty. No cars in the parking lot, no movement in the windows, no sign of human presence anywhere. Yet I felt absolutely certain that I was not alone. Something was about to happen. I could feel it in every fiber of my being, though I had no idea what to expect. All I knew was that my desperate search for Allah had led me to this place, this moment, this prayer mat behind a Christian church, where I was about to encounter the divine in a way that would change everything I thought I knew. about God. I should have known that when a seeking heart cries out to the Almighty, He always answers. I just never imagined that His answer would come in the form it did. I began the duhur prayer just as I had thousands of times before. Standing on my prayer mat facing Mecca, I raised my hands to my ears and declared, Allahu Akbar, God is greatest. But from the very first word, something felt different. The Arabic phrases that usually flowed automatically from my lips now seemed to carry unusual weight, as if each syllable was being carefully weighed and measured by an unseen listener. I folded my right hand over my left across my chest and began reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran that begins every Muslim prayer. Bismillah ir-Rahman ir-Rahim, in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of all the worlds. The familiar words should have brought comfort, but instead I felt a growing sense of anticipation, as if I was standing on the edge of something enormous. Moving into the ruku position, I bowed forward with my hands on my knees and repeated, Subhana Rabbiyal Azim, 3 times. Glory be to my Lord the Great. As I straightened back up, I felt that strange presence even more intensely. The air around me seemed to shimmer with an energy I couldn't name, couldn't explain, but couldn't ignore. Then came the sujood, the prostration that is the heart of Islamic prayer. I knelt down and placed my forehead against the prayer mat, assuming the position of complete submission that I had performed countless times since childhood. Subhana Rabbiyal Ala, I whispered, Glory be to my Lord, the Most High. But as my forehead touched the mat, everything changed. The moment my head made contact with the ground, I was engulfed in the most brilliant light I had ever experienced. Not harsh or blinding, but warm and welcoming, like being wrapped in liquid sunshine. My eyes were closed, yet I could see this light as clearly as if I was staring directly into it. It filled my vision completely, pushing away every shadow, every doubt, every trace of darkness. But the light was nothing compared to the presence I felt. Imagine the strongest feeling of love you've ever experienced, then multiply it by infinity. That's the closest I can come to describing the overwhelming sense of being completely known and utterly cherished that flooded through me. Every cell in my body felt alive with this love, vibrating with a joy I didn't know was possible. I tried to lift my head, tried to move, but I couldn't. Not because I was paralyzed with fear, but because I was held in place by the most perfect peace I had ever known. For the first time in months, maybe years, my mind was completely still. No anxiety about work, no guilt about missed prayers, no loneliness in a foreign land, just absolute, perfect peace. Then I heard my name, not spoken aloud, but communicated directly into my heart with a clarity that made every human voice I'd ever heard sound like a whisper. Aban. The way my name was spoken contained more love than I had received in my entire lifetime. It was spoken by someone who had known me before I was born, who had watched every step I had taken, who had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. Look inside your own heart right now. Have you ever felt completely known by another person? Not just understood, but known down to the very core of who you are? That's what I experienced, except this knowing came from someone whose love was so pure, so complete, that it made every other love I had ever known feel like a shadow. Then I saw him. Through my closed eyes, in that brilliant light, I saw a figure approaching me. I knew instantly who it was, though everything in my Islamic upbringing told me it was impossible. The man walking toward me bore the unmistakable marks of crucifixion. His hands and feet showed the wounds of nails, and his side bore the scar of a Roman spear. This was Jesus Christ, the one Muslims call Isa, but who I was now seeing in his full divine glory. He knelt beside me as I remained prostrate on my prayer mat. His presence was so overwhelming that I felt I might dissolve entirely, yet I had never felt safer in my life. When he reached out his nail-scarred hand and placed it gently on my head, I felt a surge of love, so powerful that I began to weep uncontrollably. Aban, he said again, his voice carrying the authority of creation itself, yet tender beyond description. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. These words, spoken in perfect Arabic, penetrated every barrier I had built around my heart. They didn't just enter my ears, they were written across my soul in letters of fire. Everything I had been taught about Jesus suddenly crumbled and reformed. This wasn't just a prophet, as I had been told. This wasn't just a good teacher or even a messenger from God. This was God Himself, in human form, reaching down to touch a desperate Muslim man who had been searching for Him in all the wrong ways. The realization hit me like lightning. All those empty prayers, all that spiritual hunger, all that desperate seeking, it had been leading me to this moment. Allah hadn't been distant. He had been drawing me to His Son. Every missed prayer, every moment of spiritual dryness, every day of feeling lost in America had been orchestrated to bring me to this place, this time, this encounter. Years of religious study, decades of Islamic devotion, a lifetime of believing I knew who God was, all of it was transformed in that single moment. I understood with perfect clarity that Jesus wasn't just claiming to be the way to God. He was demonstrating it by reaching me in my moment of deepest spiritual need. The tears wouldn't stop coming. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming relief. Like a man who had been lost in the desert for days, suddenly finding an oasis. The spiritual thirst that had been consuming me was finally being quenched by the living water Himself. I don't know how long I remained prostrate on that prayer mat, weeping in the presence of Jesus Christ. Time seemed to have stopped entirely. The overwhelming love, the brilliant light, the perfect peace, all of it continued to wash over me in waves. But gradually, very gradually, I became aware that the supernatural encounter was drawing to a close. The light began to fade, not disappearing, but withdrawing, like the sun setting slowly on the most beautiful day of my life. When I finally found the strength to lift my head, the first thing I noticed was that my face was soaked with tears. My prayer mat was damp beneath me. I sat back on my heels, trying to process what had just happened, trying to make sense of an experience that defied every category my mind could create. Had I really just encountered Jesus Christ? Had the Son of God really spoken to me? A Muslim man behind a Christian church? I looked around the church grounds, half expecting to see some physical evidence of what had occurred, but everything looked exactly as it had before. the same oak trees, the same quiet parking lot, the same peaceful afternoon light filtering through the branches. Yet I felt completely transformed, as if I was seeing the world through new eyes. That's when I heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the church building. I turned to see an elderly man walking toward me across the grass. He appeared to be in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire rimmed glasses. He was wearing a simple dark suit and carried himself with the gentle dignity of someone comfortable in his own skin. Panic shot through me. Here I was, a Muslim man, with a prayer mat spread behind a Christian church, my face streaked with tears, probably looking like I had lost my mind. How could I possibly explain what had just happened? How could I tell this stranger that I had just encountered Jesus Christ on his church property? But as the man drew closer, I saw no judgment in his expression, no suspicion or concern. Instead, his face radiated the same kind of peace I had just experienced, though on a more human scale. When he spoke, his voice was warm and genuinely caring. "Son, are you all right?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance away. I was in my office and felt led to check outside. "My name is Pastor Williams, and this is my church. I can see you've been praying, and I don't want to intrude, but you look like you might need someone to talk to." The kindness in his voice broke down whatever defenses I might have tried to build. Here was a Christian pastor finding a Muslim man on his church property, and his first concern was for my welfare, not his property rights or religious boundaries. When was the last time someone showed you such unexpected kindness, especially when you were the one who seemed to be in the wrong place? "I'm sorry," I managed to say, my voice still shaky from weeping. "I know this must look strange. I was just trying to find a quiet place to pray, and your church grounds seemed so peaceful. I hope I haven't caused any offense." Pastor Williams smiled gently and shook his head. "No offense taken whatsoever. But if I may say so, you look like a man who has just encountered something significant. Would you like to come inside and talk about it? I have coffee brewing, and sometimes it helps to share what's on our hearts." I hesitated, looking down at my prayer mat, then back at this kind stranger. Everything in my Islamic background told me to politely decline and leave immediately. Christians and Muslims might coexist peacefully, but we didn't typically sit down for theological discussions. Yet something in Pastor Williams' eyes reminded me of the love I had just experienced in Jesus' presence. "I'm Muslim," I said finally, as if that explained everything and should send him running. "I gathered that from your prayer mat," Pastor Williams replied with a gentle chuckle. "That doesn't change my invitation. In fact, it might make our conversation even more interesting." Something in his response convinced me that this meeting wasn't coincidental. After what had just happened to me, I was beginning to see God's hand in circumstances I might have previously dismissed as chance encounters. I carefully folded my prayer mat and followed Pastor Williams toward the church building. As we walked, he asked simple questions about my background, my work, my experience in America. Nothing pushy or probing, just genuine interest in me as a person. I found myself sharing details I rarely told anyone. Something about his presence made me feel safe in a way I hadn't expected. The inside of the church was simple but beautiful. Wooden pews faced a modest altar, and afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. I had never been inside a Christian sanctuary before, and I was surprised by how peaceful it felt. Not foreign or threatening, but somehow familiar. Pastor Williams led me to a small office behind the sanctuary and poured 2 cups of coffee from a well used coffee maker. As we sat across from each other in comfortable chairs, he looked at me with those kind eyes and said, "Now then, what happened out there that has you looking like a man whose whole world just changed?" The question hung in the air between us. How could I tell him that Jesus Christ had just appeared to me? How could I explain that everything I believed about God had been turned upside down in the space of a single prayer? How could I share the most profound spiritual experience of my life with someone whose faith I had been taught to view as misguided? But as I looked into Pastor Williams' face, I saw something that gave me courage. This man already knew what I was going to tell him. Somehow, he was expecting it. So I took a deep breath and began to tell him about the encounter that would change everything. I spent the next 3 weeks meeting with Pastor Williams almost every day during my lunch break. What started as a single conversation about my supernatural encounter became an intensive study that would shake the very foundations of everything I believed about God, salvation, and eternal truth. Pastor Williams never pressured me or tried to argue me into conversion. Instead, he simply opened the Bible and let God's word speak for itself. The first thing that stunned me was discovering how much the Bible spoke about Jesus in the Old Testament, centuries before he was even born. Pastor Williams showed me prophecy after prophecy that Jesus had fulfilled with perfect precision. Isaiah 53 describing his suffering, Psalm 22 detailing his crucifixion, Daniel 9 pinpointing the exact time of his coming. These weren't vague predictions that could be twisted to fit anyone. They were specific, detailed prophecies that could only describe one person in all of history. But the hardest part wasn't learning new information about Jesus. The hardest part was facing what this meant for everything else I believed. If Jesus truly was the Son of God, if he really was the way to salvation, then what did that say about Islam? What did it mean for my relationship with my family, my community, my entire identity? The sleepless nights began almost immediately. I would lie in bed, wrestling with questions that felt like they might tear me apart. Had I been wrong about Allah my entire life? Had my father been wrong? Had generations of my family been following a false path? The very thought felt like betrayal of the deepest kind. Have you ever faced a truth so overwhelming that accepting it would cost you everything you held dear? That's where I found myself. Every fiber of my being wanted to reject what I was learning, to find some way to reconcile my Islamic faith with my encounter with Jesus. But the evidence was too clear, the internal confirmation too strong. Pastor Williams gave me a Bible to take home, and I began reading the New Testament in secret. The words of Jesus leaped off the page with an authority I had never encountered in any other religious text. When he said, "I am the bread of life," or "I am the resurrection and the life," these weren't just beautiful metaphors. They were claims to divinity that demanded a response. Either Jesus was who he claimed to be, or he was the greatest deceiver in human history. The turning point came when I read John 14:6 for myself. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. These words, which I had heard Pastor Williams quote during our first meeting, now burned themselves into my consciousness. Jesus wasn't offering one path among many to God. He was claiming to be the only path. I called my parents that night, needing to hear familiar voices, hoping somehow they could help me make sense of what was happening. But when I tried to share even a hint of my spiritual struggle, my father's response was swift and stern. Aban, you are in a dangerous place, he said, his voice heavy with concern. America is full of people who want to steal our faith. You must be strong. Remember that Allah is testing you. Come home if you need to remember who you are. My mother got on the phone, tears evident in her voice. My son, please don't let them confuse you. You were raised in the truth. Your grandfather died reciting the Shahada. This is our family's faith for generations. Don't break the chain. Their words, meant to strengthen my resolve, only deepened my agony. These weren't evil people trying to lead me astray. These were my parents, who loved me and wanted what they believed was best for my soul. But I couldn't deny what I had experienced, couldn't ignore the growing certainty in my heart that Jesus was calling me to follow him. The internal battle raged for days. I would wake up determined to put this whole Jesus experience behind me, to return to being a faithful Muslim. But then I would remember his nail-scarred hands reaching toward me, his voice calling my name with perfect love, and I knew there was no going back. Pastor Williams never pushed me toward a decision, but he could see the struggle written across my face. During one of our meetings, he looked at me with great compassion and said, Aban, following Christ has always cost everything. He told his disciples to take up their cross daily. For some people, that cross is lighter. For others, like you, it's incredibly heavy. Only you can decide if knowing Jesus is worth the price. Have you ever had to choose between God and family? Between truth and comfort? Between what you knew was right and what would cost you everything you held dear? That's the choice I face, and it nearly broke me. The decision crystallized on a cold December morning 3 weeks after my encounter. I was reading Jesus' words in Matthew 10. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. The words hit me like lightning. This wasn't just about intellectual belief or religious preference. This was about ultimate allegiance, ultimate love, ultimate commitment. I knelt in my apartment and prayed the most difficult prayer of my life. Jesus, if you are truly God, if you are truly the only way to the Father, then I surrender my life to you completely. I don't understand how I'll tell my family. I don't know how I'll face my community. But I can't deny what you've shown me. I believe you died for my sins and rose again. I want to follow you no matter what it costs. The peace that flooded my heart in that moment confirmed what I already knew deep inside. This wasn't just an emotional decision or cultural rebellion. This was the response of a soul that had found its true home at last. Now, I had to tell the world. The phone call to my parents was the hardest thing I had ever done. My hand shook as I dialed their number, knowing that the words I was about to speak would shatter their hearts and possibly end our relationship forever. When my father answered, his voice warm and familiar. I almost hung up, but I knew I couldn't live a lie any longer. Baba, I said, using the childhood name I had always called him, I need to tell you something important, something that will be very difficult for you to hear. The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like eternity before he spoke. You have become a Christian, haven't you? His voice was flat, resigned, as if he had been dreading this moment since I left for America. Yes, Baba, Jesus Christ appeared to me. He showed me that He is the way to God. I cannot deny what I have seen and experienced. What followed was the sound of my father weeping. Not angry shouting, not furious arguments, just the broken sobs of a man whose son had just told him he was choosing eternal damnation. When my mother took the phone, her tears were so heavy she could barely speak. Aban, my child, what have they done to you? How can you throw away paradise for this? How can you break your mother's heart like this? Look inside your own heart right now. Have you ever caused that kind of pain to someone you love? Have you ever had to choose between truth and the peace of your family? The agony of that conversation will stay with me until my dying day. Within hours, my phone began ringing constantly. Uncles, cousins, family friends, all calling to plead with me to reconsider. Some were angry, some were heartbroken, some tried to reason with me using Islamic theology. The local imam from the Islamic Center, 40 minutes away, drove to my apartment that very evening, spending 3 hours trying to convince me I had been deceived by Satan. You have been living alone too long, he said with genuine concern. You have become isolated from the Ummah, the community of believers. Come home to us. This confusion will pass. But it wasn't confusion, and we both knew it. The certainty in my heart about Jesus grew stronger with each passing day, not weaker. Every attempt to argue me out of my faith only confirmed what I already knew to be true. The social cost was immediate and devastating. My Muslim friends stopped calling. Business contacts who had been helping me establish myself professionally suddenly became unavailable. My roommate, a fellow Pakistani engineer, asked me to move out within the week. The Islamic grocery store where I had been shopping refused to serve me once word spread. At work, the handful of other Muslim employees began avoiding me in the hallways. During lunch breaks, instead of the friendly conversation we used to share about home and family, I ate alone. The isolation was crushing, but every time I considered backing away from my decision, I would remember that moment behind the church when Jesus had called my name. Pastor Williams became my lifeline during those dark weeks. He connected me with other believers who had come from Muslim backgrounds, and their stories gave me strength. I learned that persecution and family rejection were par for the course for Muslim converts to Christianity. It didn't make the pain less, but it helped me understand that I wasn't alone in this journey. The decision to be baptized publicly was not made lightly. Pastor Williams explained that baptism was the biblical way to declare my faith publicly, to identify completely with the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But we both knew that once I was baptized, there would be no hiding my conversion any longer. It would be a public declaration that could never be taken back. Ask yourself this question: what would you be willing to sacrifice to follow Jesus? Your reputation, your family relationships, your financial security, your physical safety. I was about to find out exactly what my faith would cost. The baptism took place on a Sunday morning in January, exactly 1 month after my encounter with Jesus. As I stood in the baptismal pool at the front of the church, looking out at the congregation that had welcomed me with such love, I felt the same overwhelming peace I had experienced behind the church building. Pastor Williams spoke to the congregation before baptizing me. Today we celebrate what God has done in Aban's life. This young man has counted the cost of following Christ and found Jesus worthy of everything he's had to give up. His testimony will encourage us all to hold our faith more precious. When I went under the water, I felt like every burden, every guilt, every spiritual emptiness I had ever carried was washed away completely. When I came up, gasping and laughing and crying all at the same time, I felt like a completely new person. The old Aban, the one who had spent his life trying to earn Allah's approval through perfect prayers and religious works, was gone forever. In his place stood a man who knew he was loved unconditionally by the Creator of the universe. The congregation erupted in celebration, and for the first time since making my decision public, I felt surrounded by family again. These people, most of whom I had only known for a few weeks, welcomed me as a brother with the kind of love I had only dreamed about. That afternoon, I called my parents one more time. My father's voice was cold and formal when he answered, "Baba, I just wanted you to know that I was baptized today. I know this hurts you, but I pray that someday you will understand that I haven't rejected God. I found Him. You are no longer my son," he said quietly. "You have chosen hell over paradise, and you have brought shame on our family name. Do not call this number again." The line went dead, and my heart broke into a million pieces. But even through the pain, I knew I had made the right choice. Jesus had warned that following him would sometimes mean losing everything else. He had also promised that those who lost their lives for his sake would find true life. 6 years later, I can tell you with absolute certainty that Jesus kept his promise. He replaced everything I lost with something infinitely better.